So I'll pass this over to Inez, who will tell us a little bit about each of these works that we have up on the screen.
Perfect. Thank you, Sophie. So this first one here is by Thomas Roach, and the work is titled Willestead Gatehouse, made in 1928, and Oil on Board. So Thomas Roach was a Canadian painter from Windsor, Ontario, so he's local. He brought a fresh and modern approach to landscape art by using bold, expressive brushwork, rich colors, and simplified forms. At the time when most artists were interested in capturing the rugged and unforgiving landscapes of Northern Ontario, Roach was drawn to the unique twin city, twin nation landscape of Windsor and Detroit. It was those scenes overlooked by the province's dominant artists and art movement to which he dedicated his time and energy. And he unfortunately passed away at the age of 37. And so a bit about the house depicted in this image. It's part of Willestead Manor in the heart of Walkerville, and it was built for Edward Chandler Walker in 1906. Albert Kahn was the architect, and he's known as the architect of Detroit. And he built 3 buildings on the estate. So the Manor House, the Coach House, and the Gatehouse right here. It was designed in the 16th century Tudor Jacobean style of an English manor house. The main building was started in 1904. The exterior of gray limestone quarried in Amherstburg was hand cut at the worksite by Scottish stonemasons, specifically imported for the project. The interior is graced with rich wood paneling, detailed hand carvings, and Carrara marble. So it was very a luxurious project.
I've had the chance to kind of walk the grounds at Willestead Manor, and just the architecture and the detail in each of the individual buildings is quite remarkable. And even as you walk around the property, each kind of facade or side of the manor and the house, it's almost done in a different style, but in some ways it just flows really nicely together. You see all the wood, like you mentioned, the wood paneling and the stone, and just the detail and care and attention that went into the building and the creation of the works is really quite lovely. And this painting here, just the little red roof that pops out in contrast to the blue sky or the background, and these bold brush marks and brushwork that we can see. We can see the ground with the green. We can see some purple and white clouds in the background, so that adds a little bit of depth. But it's a very simple little building, right? Just a roof, and it doesn't look overly complicated. It looks like it might be 2 stories, since we have some windows at the ground level and some higher up in the roof line. I'm imagining that red little bit that's kind of jutting upwards might be a chimney. So it's a very, very simple work. It's a simple painting, but just the texture that the artist created here is really quite special. All right. So hopefully that'll give everyone some inspiration for their own projects today. If you're not doing sculptures, if you're not creating like a 3D model of a house, you can always try drawing it or painting it as well.
So this one is it's a photograph made by James Breukelman. It's titled Untitled House, 2,839 Hot Properties. And so the artist was born on the island of Trinidad in 1941. And the series of Hot Properties, Urban House Portraiture, is a series of photographs by James Breukelman that explores homes and gardens in smaller neighborhoods around Vancouver, British Columbia in the 1980s, capturing vanishing unique homes in areas of Vancouver undergoing rapid development. And he calls his work environmental portraits. And he's quoted by saying, "What interested me about these houses was that even though they began life looking very plain and much the same as each other, their owners managed to transform them into something special through modest personal touches to their exteriors, along with carefully planted and trimmed gardens." And he spoke with each homeowner before taking the photos, which led him to see the homes as expressions of their owners' personalities. And he's quoted again saying, "Looking at them, I felt they functioned beautifully as self-portraits, unique expressions of the personalities and values of the people living within them."
How interesting. What a cool project, right? Because we
Mhm.
often see photographers taking pictures of people and taking photos, maybe of their environment, but we rarely get to see their homes or the house itself as the subject or the main character almost of a
Mhm.
work. So it's a really like front facing central portrait, and we can kind of, I don't know about you, but I kind of see a face in this house as well. The two windows kind of like eyes, and the door as the nose, and the stairs, since they're curved, it looks a little bit like a smile. So
Mhm.
it's like the house has a personality. It's very much its own character. And it's what I found particularly interesting is that the photographer talked to the homeowners and the people that lived inside of these houses, and he got to know not only the property but also the people who lived inside the
Mhm.
houses. So I thought that was really interesting how each kind of person puts their own personality into each of the homes that in which they live,
Mhm.
from the lawn to what plants they plant, maybe even to what color the front door might be, or what trees they have. Um, so it's a charming work for sure, and I really love the architecture of it. It's a really simple house, but those big columns and the arch to get to the front door, and the stairs too are quite unique. I've never seen like a just a very simple house with elaborate stairs like that to get up. So it's really quite interesting, and it's kind of sad too that most of the houses that he photographed were demolished,
Yeah.
um, because Vancouver, as some of you may know, property. I think this is why it's called hot property. Property in Vancouver is quite expensive, and some of these houses were demolished to create condos and apartment buildings. So it's almost a record of houses at that time as well.
Mhm.
We'll go on to the next one. All right. I'm
And
excited to learn about this one.
yeah, so this is by Robert Pilot, titled "Blue House, Bay St. Paul," and it's oil on canvas. And so the artist was born in October of 1898 in St. John's, Newfoundland. And in 1910, his widowed mother married the artist Maurice Cullen, moving it into Cullen's home in Montreal. As a child, Pilot assisted Cullen in his studio, and the two would take sketching trips together. He later studied in Montreal under William Bremner. Then, in March 1916, he joined the army. From 1920 to 1922, he studied at l'Académie Julian in Paris. In 1922, he showed some of his work at the Paris Salon. And then his work took on Impressionist influences after he visited the artist colony at Concarneau. And he and two other artists were asked to join the group of seven, but they simply could not share the philosophy of the others. They did not feel compelled to paint the remote wilderness of Canada, but preferred those inhabited places, particularly the lower St. Lawrence region, as Pilot's first love as subject was always Quebec. And so we can see
Mhm.
that here with like the brutal winter and the mounds of snow that go up to the houses and cover the streets.
Like, even not knowing the title or knowing the artist, I could have guessed that this was Quebec City.
Mm-hmm.
There's such a distinct architecture style. In Quebec City, you see all those old homes, and the roofs are are often exactly like that house there that we see, kind of the main house, with the black roof. It's a very distinct style.
Mm-hmm.
And having been to Quebec City in the winter time, this is a scene that is familiar to myself, anyways, but really quite charming. And I really love Just the hint of people that we can see, just those like little shapes and shadows, and the trees as well. It brings life into the work.
Mhm.
And it's a really quite simple piece as well, but we get a glimpse of kind of like the work that we just saw, hot properties.
Mhm.
We get a glimpse of like community life and life in this little town, or this little village here. Um, and also, it reminds me of the work that we saw by Thomas Roach, the first one, where you also mentioned that he was not interested in capturing, beautiful mountains and landscapes. He was drawn
Mhm.
to cities, and that's why he was drawn to Detroit and Windsor. And this artist here, Robert Pilot, he was also interested in cities and people and capturing that mood. So another great work in the
Mhm.
AGW collection. And
And
this,
this,
oh, go for it.
I was going to say, I'm sorry, but I think in this image we're reminded of like the utilitarian function of homes, to protect us from the elements, like
Mhm.
like amount of snow.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't it Le Corbusier that said a house is a machine for living?
Hmm.
I believe
Yeah.
that was him, right? So a house,
Hmm.
it can be beautiful, and it should be beautiful, but it's also has to be functional, right? We have to live in these houses, and it has to protect us from the elements. So there's lots of things that kind of play into architecture. So that's really quite interesting.
Hmm.
The next work here uh, is a beautiful sculpture. Can you tell us a little bit more about it?
Yeah, of course. So this is by Angus Trudeau, and it's titled Indian Log House, made in 1982 out of wood, paint, and glass. And the artist was born on Manitoulin Island. And he's an artist of Ojibwe descent, and he lived much of his life on Manitoulin Island and worked as a sailor and cook for Lake Huron commercial ships. Self-taught in the visual arts, his paintings and sculptures concentrate on daily life on the island and the Great Lakes Basin and draw inspiration from the region's cultural history. His style conveys the lively delight with which Trudeau viewed the world around him and its ghosts from the past. Known mostly for his paintings, his sculptural works are less known, but this work, Indian Log House, relates to a corresponding painting of the same title and date.
What really struck me about this piece is the construction of it, right? Because the work, if we're looking at the dimensions, it's not a
Mm-hmm.
huge house. It's almost like a dollhouse size, right? It's not very big, but just the construction and the detail that went into it, we can see where all the pieces of wood kind of interlocked and are joined. We can see
Mm-hmm.
the window pane, right? All the little details with the glass and the trim around the door and the bricks in the chimney as well. Um, so just the care that went into it is really quite beautiful, and I really love the color palette as well. It's very quite simple. It reminds me of the work that we just saw, that house. It's very
Mm-hmm.
quite similar, but just a very simple house, but it holds a lot of meaning as well. So today, as you're working, if you're creating a sculpture or creating a drawing, don't think too much about like the aesthetics of it. Sure, we want it to be beautiful, but we also want it to have meaning, right? It has to be very quite personal to the person
Mm-hmm.
who's making it. What memories were made in that house? Who were the people who lived in the house as well? So this house has a lot of meaning to the artist, some cultural meaning, some family meaning. It's really quite special. And the next work is a little different, a little bit more abstract. So we'll give you all a minute to kind of look at it. There's lots to take in. It's bright, it's bold, um, but Inez will tell us about it.
Mm-hmm. So this is by Hortense Gordon. It's titled Cottages Cape Cod, date unknown, and it's oil on canvas. And she was the younger of two daughters born to James Harvey Matisse and Sarah Louise Crompton. She won scholarships to attend the Hamilton Art School at a very young age. Following her move to Chatham, Ontario, Matisse was appointed to the staff of Chatham Central School, where she taught China painting, drawing, and painting, in addition to continuing her own private classes for students. Her experience as an art educator quickly led to another appointment in 1918 at the Hamilton Technical School. In 1934, Hortense was appointed to the lead of the art department, and she remained at Hamilton Technical School for more than 30 years. Gordon's belonged to a very small group of women abstract expressionist painters of her generation in Anglophone Canada. These women developed an interest in the male-dominated field of abstract art. By 1957, she found her work in the company of the Toronto-based abstract artist known as Painters 11, with whom she exhibited in 1957, and alongside Alexandra Luke, she was one of the 2 female artists of its 11 exhibitors. And a bit about this work in specific, Gordon's Cottages Cape Cod was developed from the subject of a populated coastal region located along the eastern American seaboard in Provincetown, Massachusetts.
So at first glance, we don't really see or notice the cottages or the homes. But when you slow down and you kind of read it like a book, so from left to right and up and down, you can start to see familiar shapes, right? We can see the triangles or the planes of a roof line. We can see the rectangles of maybe windows. But the beauty of this as well is that we're all going to see something a little bit different as our brain kind of works really hard to put these pieces almost like a puzzle, seeing how they fit together. And we're all going to look at them in a little bit of a different way, even though we're looking at the same painting, but just the different colors. It's really quite abstract. It's really quite different. But it's really bold, it's vibrant. You can feel like the life in all of these cottages. And it feels like summer. It really feels like summer, right? When you think of going to the cottage, at least when I think going to the cottage, I always associate it to summertime and spending your day at the cottage by the lake, swimming and having fun and being with friends and family. So a really beautiful scene. And I think it's a really great lesson for all of us as we're working today and creating our own little homes and houses. It doesn't have to be a perfect, beautiful house. If, the walls aren't the same size, it doesn't matter. If the roof is a little bit crooked, that's okay. It's the character and the charm behind all of the works as well. So that was it for our little virtual tour of the collection. So Inès is going to take us through some architectural styles and techniques that maybe we have seen in some of the works, and maybe you can try to go back and associate kind of the techniques to the works that we saw. It'll be like a fun little challenge, see if you're able to do it. But Inès, can you tell us a little bit about different styles that we find in architecture?
Definitely. And these are just 4 of them. There are so many, like I couldn't list them all. So I just chose a few. So the first one is classical. So this was constructed by the ancient Greeks and Romans, and architects valued symmetry, columns, rectangular windows, and pediments. And actually they created concrete back in like the 5th century. So they were using that as a construction material, which allowed their structures, I guess, to stay intact all this time. And then the Art Nouveau style, and it had to do more with the detail than the actual building style itself, focusing on anthropomorphic or, lifelike natural ornamentation, mosaics, use of arches and curved forms in Japanese motifs. So it was very heavily decorated, and there was an attention to detail from banisters to door handles to, you see the roof was very intricate. It was in the details that this Art Nouveau style was very expressed. And then to contrast, there's modernism, and it adhered to the motto of form follows function and disregarded ornamentation. So there was no excess. and it was open concept spaces, and clean lines were favored elements of composition. So it was like the machine for living, and modernists believe that through good design, utopia could be achieved. And another motto that they had was less is more. So it didn't require all of that ornamentation to fulfill its function. And then to contrast modernism, there's postmodernism, and it emerged out of disdain for modernism. And the architects embraced contradiction, humor, asymmetry, fragmentation. Color and textures were unrelated to the function of the building. And so they came up with this saying called less is bore. So they were bored with modernism. So there's a lot of, humor in place. So in this building that I chose here, it cut off kind of, but there are binoculars actually that are just like an add-on to the building. And I know a lot of architect critics love to hate postmodernism because they're so out there and they command your attention.
Absolutely. You're right. There are so many different styles of architecture, and we kind of see a progression, almost like a timeline of where it started and where it's kind of going. And I'm so intrigued by Art Nouveau, just the detail and the color, and especially this building that you chose here, the roof, all the different colorful tiles that creates this beautiful gradient. And then in contrast to that modern house, right? It's completely different. So I'm interested to know, like, what house would you pick out of these four here? Where would you like to live?
I would choose the modernist house. That's Villa Savoie by Le Corbusier, and I think it's stunning. Like, I love it so much.
It is very, very quite simple. I would be intrigued to see inside the Art Nouveau house that you chose, just for the detail and the craftsmanship that really interests me. So I would love to see in that. But I agree, there's something about that modern house that's so clean and very streamlined. I would love to see it. But hey, wouldn't it be awesome to live in a pair of binoculars as well? I think that would be pretty cool. That would be really interesting. And this, I was unfamiliar with the principles of good architecture, and I'm excited to learn about the three that we have here.
So these three principles were coined by the Roman architect Vitruvius in about the 5th century. So this is like an ancient canon that's kind of stood the test of time. But throughout the years, different scholars have like switched the order of the terms and have elaborated on it. But basically, for like to be considered a good building, there's firmitas, utilitas, and venustas. So firmitas is like durability. It should stand up robustly and remain in good condition. So it has to have like the structural integrity to last. And then utilitas, which is commodity, it should be useful and function well for the people using it. And then the last one is the beauty or the aesthetic appeal. It should delight people and raise their spirits. But Sophie mentioned this earlier, and one thing about architecture, it's beyond what it appears like. It's about like the memories and your experience while walking through those spaces. So if it can be good to you without adhering to these principles.
So it's important to have like a good base. It should be really strong and protect you. It should be useful and kind of intuitive, but it should also be beautiful. And I think those are really three good principles. Excellent. All right, so we're getting to the fun part. I know we did a lot of talking and we're getting to the good part. But today is really open. This is why it's called an open studio. Use what you have at home, use what you have around you. You can choose to paint, you can choose to draw, you can choose to sculpt. If you have clay or Play-Doh, you can choose to do a collage, which I think I might try today. I have some magazines, so we'll see if I can do some sort of like installation collage. You can use photography. We saw a really great example of James Breukelman's series. So if you want to go outside and take a photo of your house or look at your house in a different way through a camera lens, you can do that as well. Or you can use a mix of medias and create some sort of installation or sculpture. Use paint, use paper, use fabric, use what you have around you. So today is completely open, and that's why we call it Open Studio. But I can go through just very quickly different ways to create marks, different textures while drawing. So you can use the color mixing technique where you overlap two colors to create layers and a little bit more depth. And you can kind of blend and it creates a really beautiful gradient or pattern that has a lot of depth. You can use the scrumbling technique, and that's just scribbling, and it creates texture and value. So maybe if you're drawing trees, just go wild and scribble a little bit. You can also use the stippling technique by using small, choppy strokes to create a stippled effect on your paper. You can use the sgraffito technique where you push really, really hard on your paper, say with an oil pastel or a crayon, and then using the end of a toothpick or a paper clip to kind of dig or carve into the oil pastels. It creates a really beautiful effect. Cross-hatching is a great technique to create shadows. So if you're drawing a three-dimensional house or a cube or a shape, you can use cross-hatching to create shading and different effects. Another great technique is to use oil on top of your material. So if you're using oil pastels or if you're using pencils, you can use either like a little cotton swab or a cotton ball soaked in Vaseline or cooking oil, even baby oil or coconut oil, and kind of rub it over your pastels, and it creates this beautiful soft gradient as well. If you're using sculpture today, there are different ways that you can attach materials together. So you can either roll it, you can loop it, you can curl it, you can make tabs so that it stands up, or you can create three-dimensional structures. You can create fringe. So maybe you want to create grass around your home or your little sculpture, and you can use paper and make fringe. Or if you want to make a roof, you can pleat the paper almost like a fan, and it creates like a roof. That just gave myself a really great idea. I think I might use that technique. Also spirals or creating cones to make a tower. Another great way is to create slits and slots. So I made like a little example here. So I have two little squares, and I made a slit in both of them. And if you kind of interlock them, it creates a shape. So you can even stand it up and it's pretty solid. So using slits and slots, or you can also fold your paper as well to create some shapes. So